Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's episode of Couch Trip, Therapy for Everyday Life, with none other than yours truly, Billy Courtright, and the infamous, soon-to-be famous therapist extraordinaire, Mr. Eddie Reece. So Eddie and I were just talking a little bit off air, as we do before we hit the record button on our Zoom recording device with our Yeti microphones. Hopefully one day they'll sponsor us. And we had a conversation, and we decided that we should have a expose. We should have an in-depth Barbara Walters style interview to get to the heart of who is Eddie Reece. Recently, we've answered questions like, what is therapy? Who might benefit from therapy? How to get it? We've asked and answered some questions that hopefully were impactful and valuable. And if we encouraged one person to go to their phone or computer and search a therapist near them to share some challenges and receive support, we are overwhelmingly grateful. That is absolutely why we do this. And we're just trying to save the world one mind at a time. So we also talked about
I'm really looking forward to having the 2 or 3 subscribers will get asking us questions and stuff. So
yes, two or three, then 2 or 300, then 2 or 3,000, then 2 or 300,000, then 2 or 3 million, and we'll see where it goes. So it kind of dawned on us that, we've heard, maybe you've heard, or maybe this is the first time you found us on YouTube. In case you have, please like this, subscribe, ask us some questions, turn on those notifications so you know when we've released an episode. If you prefer to listen to us while you drive or work out or walk through the park, that's cool too. We can be found anywhere you consume audio podcasts. We are thankful to Libsyn for syndicating us so successfully. So now that I've mentioned every single piece of technology and possible sponsor, we'll get into the question at hand, which is really, who's Eddie Reece and how did he get here? And I've had the privilege over the last couple of years to get to know what I will say is quite a bit about Eddie, but I can confidently say I don't know him certainly like his bride knows him. I don't know him like his closest friends know him. I certainly don't know him like his parents once did. So I think it would be neat to get to know a therapist from a personal level. And I think it would be really helpful for people to realize Eddie's perspective on who he is. And perhaps somewhere along the line, he'll talk about his relationship with therapy on the same side of the screen or couch that we would be on. Because I can't say it's like most therapists. I just don't know that. But Eddie is a proponent of eating his own dog food, drinking his own Kool-Aid, if you will. So I'm sure we'll talk about that. So Eddie, I think the easiest place for us to begin. Well, here, let me just pause. I mean, did I encapsulate that in a way that you kind of expected me to, or is there anything you'd like to add before we get into it?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't have any expectations of. I'm very much into doing what we do, and the way I do therapy is improv.
Yeah.
And I think we do really well there. We just throw out a subject at the beginning and then riff on it.
Yeah, and then yes, and that's the improv way.
Improv, jazz musicians,
exactly,
jam bands.
We are the conversational therapy and patient improving our way through this podcast. And to your point of expectations, it's been said expectations are the seeds of future disappointment. So in some cases, maybe in your conversations with me, you keep your expectations to a minimum, which I appreciate because it tends to keep a smile on your face.
They're non-existent. I mean, they really are. If you've watched a few of these or listened to them, you should know by now, this is not scripted.
Nope, definitely is not. So, Eddie, let's harken back. Tell me about where you were born.
I'm a native Atlantan. I was born downtown Atlanta, which was at the time was Georgia Baptist Hospital, which is no longer a hospital. I think it's a condo complex in that building or something now on Boulevard, which I think is a different name. But right smack dab in the middle of downtown Atlanta.
1975?
83, 84. I mean,
That's great.
1883.
Yes. Just after the Civil War, we were reassembling downtown Atlanta after it had burned, and Eddie was entering into the world. Okay, so you're born in downtown Atlanta. Now, for those that may not know, a native Atlantan is a rare thing. Atlanta is a booming, bustling metropolis now, and I made my way here from Chicago by way of South Florida and love it, absolutely love it. Couldn't be happier to raise my family here. But not too many people. I mean, if you look at the population of Atlanta over the last 25 years, it's gone up considerably, which obviously they're not having babies 5 at a time. So you can surmise that most of these people came in by way of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. So Eddie, how has Atlanta in your lifetime changed?
I mean, it's just where I live, which is in Alpharetta, it's a northern suburb. Growing up, this would have been considered Tennessee, Kentucky. I mean, I didn't even know it existed. Atlanta, growing up, it's hard to imagine how small it really was. I was a kid when the Braves came to town in '66, and we may have lived 5 miles from where they built Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, which was right next to where Turner Field was, which is GSU Stadium now. And we were considered way out of town. We would go downtown to watch them build the stadium or go to a game. That was the suburbs, West End. I lived in West End, and way out of town. When I was in college, undergraduate school, my first roommate said, "Hey, I'm going to go visit my parents. You want to come?" And I said, "Sure." So we get in this car and we're driving, and I'm thinking we're never going to get there. Where in the world do his parents live? And we just kept traveling north, It felt like, days. And they lived on just off Riverside Drive, just on the other side of 285, which is where, what that is now. And I've never been anywhere near there. I'm probably 19, 18, 19, 17, 18, 19 years old. I'm like, who lives out here?
Right. And for those that don't know, 285 or Riverside Drive that Eddie's referring to now is a soft boundary for the city limit. It's essentially that area of north, where what we call North Fulton County, where I also live. But so Atlanta built at the crossroads of a bunch of railroads, right in the center of the country, a rare city, really, where you're completely landbound. Not too many cities are when you think about it. Yeah. And Atlanta is one. So if you look at Atlanta, 285, which is the expressway that circles the city, it looks like a clock. So you basically, people refer to, where do you live? Oh, I'm at 1:30, I'm at 10:15 or whatever. And you kind of know where you are based on that. 285 is essentially the perimeter. So in Atlanta will say, are you inside or outside the perimeter? OTP.
Inside or outside their perimeter. Yeah. And when I was really young, this is how much it's grown. Where I lived was in College Park, south side of Atlanta.
Just north of the airport.
And actually, I was south of the airport by about 2 blocks.
Okay.
And as a kid, I walked over to the chain link fence of the airport. There was one runway and one building, and watched the planes coming in and out, the turboprops, and then the jets started coming in our house, just it was like that. And I've looked several times trying to find out where that house wound up. It was either it's somewhere under a runway, or maybe it was part of 285 or something. But yeah, that was how small it was. I could just walk over to the airport and sit down, and the planes were not far from me.
Nope.
At all. So it really has grown. So yeah, I'm a good old boy, I really did. I talked like this, and I thought, and all my family still talk like this. And if you want to learn to talk like this, all you do is you don't move your jaw. You just let it sit there. And so Southern people could actually be very good with them ventriloquists folks, because we don't hardly move because it's so hot down here. Because we don't have air conditioning. It was air conditioning and the airport that made this city what it is. Nobody would have moved here if there wasn't air conditioning.
And interestingly enough, the airport proposition wasn't only Atlantis to have. It was actually Birmingham. From what I've read and understand, is it was between Birmingham and Atlanta.
Atlanta, and Charlotte.
Yep.
Charlotte was involved in that. Who was going to be the big city? And boy, if you want an interesting story, make a great movie. The finagling, we'll call it, that went on to make that airport what went on, to make that airport happen. And yeah, that's really a very interesting story. It's a lot of down and dirty kind of stuff that folks don't know about, don't care about really. They just want their flight to be on time.
Right.
But I tell people, they'd say, "Oh, where'd you grow up?" And I'd say, "I grew up in a small town in Georgia." And they go, "Oh, which one? Atlanta?" It was. It was very, very small, and lived in College Park, West End. And while we were kind of in the West End area, and gosh, I'd have to do the math. I'm not real good at math. What year this was? It was the summer between 8th and ninth grade. So mid-60s, I'm guessing. And Atlanta, is heralded as kind of an oasis in the South in terms of racism. And it was, looking back and studying the history, but it was incredibly segregated. The neighborhood we lived in, kind of a rectangular sort of thing. You crossed one street over, there was the black neighborhood, and it was kind of the same thing. So it was a black neighborhood or a white neighborhood. And it had always been that way. The white people did not go into the black neighborhood at all for any reason. The black people would come into the white neighborhood to work, and then they would go home, after work. And as a child, I, never thought much about it. My family and friends and everybody around us were racist, but they had no idea that they were racist. They would never consider themselves. The way I've always demonstrated that to people is they'd say, "Well, I ain't got nothing against the Negroes. I just wouldn't want my daughter to marry one." you know, or I wouldn't want one living next door to me, but I've got nothing against. So that was the kind of racism that was uh, really prevalent in Atlanta. We did know about the Klan. It was active. We did hear about it. We never saw anything where we were. So that's the atmosphere that I grew up in. And if it wasn't for the Black women that came to our house and watched me and my brothers while my mom worked, I would have probably stayed that way for a long time. I would have stayed that kind of racist sort of mentality because I didn't know any better. But these women were just amazing human beings. And even today, uh, decades and decades later, most of them in my memory, and we may have only had a couple, and it really wasn't for a very long time, but in my memory, they were much older and they were somewhat heavy set. And so even today, if I see a Black woman that has that image, my heart melts. They were so good to me.
Yeah.
And I know consciously it didn't happen consciously at the time, but looking back, I went, that's where I lost my racism. That somehow, even as a kid, I was like, the things I hear can't be true. I mean, these women, in many ways treated me better than my own mother did. They were just the sweetest humans, and looked at me and treated me and my brothers as their own. Given the circumstances, how do you do that other than you just are almost pure of heart, I guess, or something? So that was a huge influence on me. And then I accidentally went to college. Growing up with a good old boy, I worked in a grocery store. And my uncle was the manager of the grocery store, and I admired my uncle. And I had a blast working there. And at the time, the union was really strong. And
the union was strong in Atlanta?
The union was strong everywhere.
Well, yeah. I mean, I grew up in Chicago. I know.
Yeah. You were in the middle of it. And so the kids that work in the grocery store, all of us had brand new muscle cars. Okay. We were the only kids that could afford a car, and we paid for them ourselves. And that's the kind of money we made. And so my dream was to be a grocery store manager like my uncle, because if I can make this much money sacking groceries and stocking shelves, I bet I can make a whole lot of money running one of these places. And I remember, and I wish I could find this woman, Carolyn Wagner, one of my English teachers. It was 11th grade English teacher, because I didn't go to school but for a few days in my senior year. She nagged me and nagged me and nagged me about going to college. And I would just tell her the same thing. I go, Miss Wagner, I don't gotta go to college. I'm gonna be a grocery store manager like my uncle, and he makes really good money, and yeah, I don't need a college degree. Okay. She's like, go to college. go to college, go to college. And I would love to give her a hug. And I guess, and I don't think I ever thought about it this way. Thank her for planting a seed. She planted a seed because I didn't come away from any of those conversations going, well, maybe I would go to college. So I accidentally went to college, and the way that happened, and a lot of things have happened like this in my life, which is really fascinating to me. That I was in bed one night listening to WSB radio, the AM version, and there was some talk show on the radio, and I had my little transistor, my little bitty transistor radio. And for whatever reason, I don't know, I decided I was going to call in and make a comment, And so I get on the phone and I'm talking to an engineer while I'm on hold, and he's telling, I said, tell me about your job. And I don't know what he said, but after the conversation, no thought. I didn't know anything about radio other than my little transistor, and I'd listen to WLS coming out of Chicago at night. I went, I'm going to be in radio.
Eddie in College Park, go.
I'm going there. Yeah. So, what in the world would make a little, girl boy redneck go, I'm going to be in radio. And that's what happened. That's how I wound up in college, because Georgia State University had a radio station, WRAS, and I just figured, well, I could work there, and to work there, I got to go to the school, so I'll apply, go, and I don't care what classes I take, and that way I work at the radio station. In the meantime, I went to one of those schools that's advertised on late night TV, you want a career in radio, kind of thing. And there was a school called the Elkins Institute, and it was located right there in downtown Atlanta. I went there to learn how to be a disc jockey. And they actually taught me a lot of things that were really valuable. And my buddy that I was hanging out with in school, we're standing outside during a break one day, and I told him, I said, that hotel over there, they've got a radio station in that hotel. It's WKLS. I just found that out, and he goes, really? And I said, yeah, let's go over there. And he's like, what are you talking about? Let's go over there. See if we can talk to somebody over there. And so I drug him across the street. We get off the elevator, and where the disc jockey was sitting, there's a big window right there at the elevator bank, so you can see into the studio. And I walked over there and knocked on the window, and I'm like, let us in. And the guy let us in. This is a different time back then, boys and girls. And we start talking, and we're like, yeah, we want to be in radio. And we go to Elkins Institute across the street, and he goes, well, if you want to be in radio, don't tell anybody that. And I'm like, really? And he goes, yeah, it doesn't have a great reputation, but, And I'm like, well, okay. And I said, well, here's my plan. I said, I just enrolled over at Georgia State. I don't start till, I don't know, 3 weeks, 6 weeks from now, something like that. And I'm going to go over to WRS and see if I can get a job there. And he's got on an Oxford cloth shirt. He unbuttons it, pulls it out like Superman. And he's got a t-shirt on that says WRS. And I'm like, whoa. And he goes, I'm Drew Murray. I'm the program director, music director. Oh, it's true. Drew was program director, music director of WRS. And I'm like, really? And he goes, yeah. He said, do you have your student ID yet? And I'm like, yeah. I'm enrolled. I'm going to start next semester. And he goes, okay. He says, go down to the school, go over to the radio station, and go in and ask for Joel Ackerman. Joel's the GM. He said, would you be willing to work the midnight to 6 a.m. Saturday night shift? And I'm like, sure. And so next day I'm knocking on the door of the radio station. I'm here to see Joel Ackerman. Drew Murray sent me. And Joel shows up, and the next Saturday night, I am on the air, and I wound up and WRAS at the time was one of the maybe 5 stations or so in the country that played albums. We put an album on the turntable. Every other radio station at the time put a 45 on the turntable. And they played the same 20, it was Bureau or Casey Kasem stuff, 20, top 40, whatever. That was what radio was at the time. So we're playing, what is now classic rock. Okay. So I was actually one of the pioneers of classic rock. I mean, that's what we were doing. We were doing this format of, we're not going to play the hits. We're going to find the album cuts that are worth playing. And then we're going to find these groups that nobody plays, like King Crimson or something. We're going to play those, and Genesis. And so that's what we did. And I became the program director there until I took Drew's place when his term was up. And at 19 years old, I could go anywhere in the city and go to any concert, any club, anything along it. All of the record companies came to us. All the concert promoters came to us before they even went to the commercial stations if it was about rock and roll, because that, our listenership was huge. And so we got all the concert tickets, and at one point I had like 350 albums. I've been selling them off. Any of you want some vinyl from the 70s, I'd like to hear that. I think I only had one turntable my whole life. Most of those albums, never even seen a needle, because they would just go here, take these, hoping, and play them. So that I wound up in radio. Just how does that happen?
So 1960s, you're spinning discs. You're in college.
This is the 70s. This was
okay. So 70s, you're in college. Yes. That's right. That's
70s.
That's right.
I'm in college. Yeah.
Super sounds of the 70s, just like Reservoir Dogs, and you're spinning vinyl. You're in Atlanta. You're going to Georgia State, and race relations. We discovered what that was like. I love the story of your formative years and how your view of the world was altered forever based on the nurturing and care, genuine love that you had from your caregiver. I have a similar story. It's not pertinent for this episode, but I'll talk to you about it off air in Chicago. Very similar situation. But anyway, so now you're spinning records, and I got to believe that at that time you thought, heck, you're going to concerts, probably bringing a date here and there. And, I don't want to presuppose, but you're a charming guy. So you're doing well. take that for what it's worth, fans. At that point, did you think that you were gonna be a well-known disc jockey or radio personality for the rest of your career?
Absolutely. Because it's really hard for people who didn't live through that to understand what a big deal that radio station was. In that we and the other, they were all college stations. I think there might have been a couple of commercial stations that played album cuts, but we changed what radio was and how the music industry viewed a radio station and what it was all about. So yeah, we all knew this was it. This was our career. And an awful lot of folks that worked at that station at that time had great careers. So that, they did really well. I'll leave the story out, but I wound up getting out of radio. And it was really upsetting to me because to your point, I really did think that's where I was going to go. And it was so upsetting to me. I got really, really down and felt very unmoored. I was just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Now I'm still working at the grocery store, making a ton of money, stocking groceries, But I was like, I don't know. I don't want to do that the rest of my life. So I was really interested in what in the world was going on inside my head and my thoughts and my feelings, and I didn't understand any of that. And so again, out of nowhere, okay, I don't know how I do this. I went and signed up for a Psych 101 class. Now, coming from where I came from, I'd never heard of psychology before I saw it in the book of classes you could take. I didn't know there was a such thing as a therapist. I didn't know that was a job. Right?
Yeah.
And I didn't go take that class to become a therapist because, again, I didn't even know that was a job even when I signed up for the class. I just thought it was a class. And I had a terrifically entertaining teacher, and he loved what he was teaching. And I was fascinated by it, so I took another one. And next thing I know, I enrolled in the undergraduate program for mental health at Georgia State. I'm going to be a therapist. And so, again, where does this come from? I mean,
so how old were you when you started your first private practice?
Well, old, because when I graduated, and to give you a little more background, my entire extended family is uneducated. Most of the people until my aunts had never graduated from high school. And so for me to graduate from college, for me to even go to college, man, I mean, although I didn't consider myself going to college when I started, I was working at a radio station and had to take stupid classes so I could work at the radio station.
I've dipped you out of Vietnam.
Yeah, I don't even remember the classes I took when I worked at the radio station because I was there every day, all day long. So it was pretty amazing that I wound up graduating from college, coming from this background of not only uneducated, but alcoholism, drug addicts, domestic violence. I mean, your standard family. It wasn't a dysfunctional family as much as it was just a family.
Well, you put the fun in dysfunctional.
Yeah, all things I tried to. So And in college, oh my gosh, just the experience of being on campus, that was like being in another universe. It wasn't another planet. It was another universe compared to what I grew up with. Until I got on campus at Georgia State, I don't think I'd ever seen an Asian person, an Indian person, anything other than a black person. There were black people and white people. And there wasn't a black person in school with me until the 8th grade. And I didn't finish that story. Somewhere between 8th and 9th grade. Okay. Segregated neighborhoods. And this is all planned out. One black family moved one street over in every neighborhood in Atlanta at the same time. And I've got this snapshot memory of looking down my street. Every house had a Brown and Reece Realty sign there, which was the black realty company. Those people must have made a fortune that summer. By the end of the summer, every single white family was gone. That's when the suburbs were created.
What?
Yeah. It's called white flight. So we moved to Mableton, Austell, West. People were moved to Snellville, Sandy Springs, where my roommate's parents lived, Fayetteville. It just, man, I was just like, I couldn't comprehend what had happened. So I wound up living in with all the other rednecks and good old boys in Mableton and Austell. So until I got to Georgia State, I never, like I said, black people, white people, those are the only people I'd heard about other people. I'd heard about Catholics. They were pretty weird people, apparently, and Jewish people. Believe it or not, people don't believe me when I say this. We heard about Jewish people, and Jewish people actually had horns on their head.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Yeah. I mean, this is how uneducated and just completely uninformed people were at that time. And sadly,
we're not talking 100 years ago. I mean, 1970s. No.
Yeah. And sadly enough, if you can speak the language, you can walk around in South Georgia and you can begin to talk to people and tell them where you're from and stuff. Don't tell them nothing about what they do. Don't show them that you drive a fancy car or, fancy cars, anything. It ain't no Ford truck or something. And they talk to you and they will say all the same things that the people I grew up with say. It really has not changed that much. So, I mean, race, the point I want to make is racism and the struggle for equality is a huge, huge part of just my body. Because growing up, being beaten and abused in so many different ways, however you're damaged as a child, it doesn't matter the method. You wind up going, I'm not good enough. I'm less than. And I think it was that part of me that helped me understand what racism really was about and what black people, I mean, I didn't think about it in terms of anybody else, were really going through. And to this day, if I hear any snippet of the I Have a Dream speak, this is what happens.
Where were you when you heard it the first time?
I don't remember. I'm sure. I saw pieces of it, on the nightly news. I mean, there were 3 news channels, and everybody tuned in at 6 o'clock. I think it was to watch news.
Why did it touch you so?
Because, and this is kind of a new thought too. This is part of why I'm a therapist, I think, in that I can relate to any marginalized person. And in that, I know what it's like to be marginalized. Now, I don't know what it's like to be a Black person. I don't know. I can't imagine, because I've talked to people about their experience of, having people watch you when you go in a store, or being pulled over by a police officer. I mean, I've been pulled over by a police officer. Not once did I ever think this could be the way I die. Right. So I can't know what that's like, but I know what it's like to be beaten down to the point where you just can't, One of those things that just popped in my head one day was, I'm going to go meet John Lewis. And I'm like, where'd that come from? And I quickly had the thought, it's like, out of all the living people in the world that I admire for how they've lived their lives, forget his politics, how he's lived his life. There's John Lewis and Jimmy Carter. And I'm like, I'm going to go meet John Lewis. And I picked up the phone and I called his office. I'd like to make an appointment with John. At the time, I lived in his district, so he was representing me. And I go, what do you want to speak to him about? I'm like, I just want to shake his hand and say thank you. And they're like, okay. And then set up a meeting, and it got canceled because he was in jail. Which I thought was pretty cool.
Getting in that good trouble?
Yeah, he was getting in good trouble. And so finally, my wife and I are sitting in his waiting room, and I'm hearing a couple of lobbyists talking about their meeting with him, and they're talking about real stuff, and I'm like, okay, well, they're gonna meet with him before I do, so, or no, after me. Anyway, so it'll be like something on the West Wing. They're gonna move me in and move me out, So we're sitting there, and John Lewis walks into the waiting room. He says, are you Eddie and Helen? And I'm like, he's like, come on by. And we sat there, Billy, and we must have talked for an hour and 15, 20 minutes, hour and a half, Not once did he feel rushed. Not once did he not pay close attention to me. And what I wound up talking about after I got through thanking him and how much I admire him, I think Bush was president at the time, and so there was still a good bit of division. First, and there was still a good bit of division. I mean, there was something that people talked about, the divide. And I'm like, boy, I don't know nothing. Yeah. And I told him, I said, there's just so much division in our politics today, and there just seems to be so much animosity. I said, be honest with you, sir. I'm kind of losing my hope. I love politics. I got into it, when I was in high school. It fascinates me. And I'm kind of losing hope. And knowing what you lived through, knowing what you do every day when you sit in Congress, I mean, and the things you must hear that are got to be weirder than what I know about. How do you hold on to hope for a better life, a better political life? And he goes, Eddie, you just never give up. And for a guy who was beaten half to death and left for dead, to say that in my mind, like, he's telling me the truth. I don't know how many years ago that was. It was quite a while ago. But boy, I come back to that moment a lot in my life, you know. And it's really funny about maybe 20 minutes into the conversation, he goes, I want you and your wife to come up to Washington and have lunch with me in the congressional dining room. Will you do that? Well, yeah. And at the time, I had a client who had been a congressional staff member, you know, and I said, hey, I got to ask you a question. I met with John Lewis today, and he invited me to come to Washington and have lunch with him in the congressional dining hall. I said, is that like a normal thing? And he goes, no.
Yeah.
He's I've never heard of anything like that. So he must have seen something in me or in our conversation. So we wound up in Washington and meeting with him and his office there in Washington. And same thing, man. Except this time he's got a staffer coming in. Representative, we got it. And he's just like, got it. I'm talking to Eddie now. A wonderful man, but back to what's touching me is part of why I'm a therapist. I know what it's like to be beaten down. And when a client comes to see me, I don't know that they really consciously know this, but they're here because they've been beaten down some way, somehow. And like me, spent decades trying to overcome that not good enough thing. And they wind up in my office because all the things they did that seemed to work, they wound up, with a good job and a decent life, maybe married and kids. In their mind, they did everything right. And they usually frame it as, why am I not happy? And I want to sit with people in that arena of you've been beaten down, and I'm going to help you learn that you don't give up. You don't give up, and you get back up, and you find a way to turn your life into something that is no longer about being good enough, because that's just a waste of time. You know, you do what, for me, John Lewis, Jimmy Carter represents you, and however you do it, go be of service, you know, which I think means go be kind, you know, and we talk about this in the podcast from time to time. It's kindness, it's compassion, it's understanding. To look at the people whom you struggle with or don't like or believe are doing things that are going to negatively affect you or someone else, and see in them somehow that they were beaten down too. Yeah, we mentioned this a couple of podcasts ago about how Germany handles pedophiles, you know. They were beaten down too. They were told they weren't good enough. And I really want for the world, and I hope I'm a small part of that when I sit with clients or even when I talk to strangers and do what I can to inspire them or uplift them a bit. I want everybody to realize that in that way, we're all the same. You know, we all faced awful, awful things. And it does, it's just a waste of time to compare them, you know, because the nervous system interprets it the same way. You know, whether if your version of being beaten down was your parents had no idea how to foster your emotional development, which will do a number on you, and you'll wind up in the same place that you're not good enough, that people aren't going to like you. And you got to make up for that. You know, we spend our whole lives trying to make up for that, and you can't. Um, if we could all just look at each other as here's somebody else that was beaten down and they're doing their damnedest to overcome it. And for the most part, they don't really know how, you know, because what we're taught in our culture is you overcome that by being enough, be good enough. But that will never ever happen. You know, 38 Nobel Prizes, $100 billion in the bank, admiration from millions of people. You're going to be with your own thoughts at some point and go, just can't get it all to work. The whole world, I think, runs off of that. You know, why our economy does what it does. It's why we go spend money, make money. You know, when I think it'd be nice to just spend your time building a barn for your neighbor, you know. So, you know, where do we start off to talk about me, telling you about me? The essence of me, I think, is that God, I'm going to slight suffer. And once I figured out what being a therapist really was to me, which I learned from being on a therapist's couch for over 3 decades, all I want to do is ease that suffering and show people how you give up on trying to overcome it and befriend it, get to know it, spend took a bit of a session this morning with a relatively new client talking about the way we're framing it is he understands he has a sense of, feeling of shame that he's not good enough and just how he runs away from it all the time. And I said, I want to help you learn to stop running and to turn around and befriend it, to see it, get to know it, hear its story. Because when you hear the story of this is what happened and this is what it did to me and this is how I really feel about myself. Unless you're a sociopath, you're going to have compassion. You're going to feel kindness. You're going to want to help. And my gosh, we need that in the world. So that's a little bit about who I am.
So we're going to pause. I'm not going to say this one's over because it's not. I have questions. I'm sure our listeners do as well. So to recap, we learned a little bit about where Eddie was born, the house he grew up in, the family, his exposure to Atlanta in the 60s and college in the 70s, internships, first jobs, career opportunities, how he was influenced to go to college, the feelings he has as a result of that influence, the gratitude he shared for the woman who recommended that he go to college, the caregivers who were African American and removed any ounce of prejudice and racism that Eddie may have had that not happened. We heard about how he was introduced to therapy, behavioral science, psychosis, psychology, and how that completely changed. We heard about John Lewis. And for those of you that don't know the story of Mr. Lewis, I encourage you to spend some time on Google and YouTube. This is a man who not only represented his constituents here in the Atlanta area, but Eddie referenced being beat down and left for dead. The stories in and around the civil rights movement for which John Lewis was walking lockstep with Martin Luther King and the group of change makers that I think we're all grateful for, some of us more so than others. But if you're not familiar with John's story and Good Trouble and his career in public service, I encourage you to look into that. You will be enlightened. And if ever you make your way to Atlanta, I encourage you to visit the places in which the civil rights movement, some of the civil rights movements were defined. Selma's not that far away either. So there's so much history down here, and it's not all bad. Yeah, we have Stone Mountain, but we have John Lewis too. We have Ambassador Young. We have Jimmy Carter, which on the date that we record this, according to his son, his days are numbered, as I think, as we all know. But regardless of your politics, no one could argue the humanity in the man that is Jim Carter, or his late bride, or even his brother. So Billy Beer, you can look that up too. So anyway, I think what we learned about Eddie is that he is of the South. He is the South, and a Southern gentleman and a compassionate capitalist who just so happens to make a living helping ease the suffering of others. And that, my friends, is absolutely beautiful. So we're going to continue this conversation. And so for some of you, you can just go on to the next YouTube video or go on to the next episode on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get podcasts. But our next episode is going to focus on the years from the mid-90s to today, which as we record this episode is 2024. So I think we did basically part one, and we're going to have part two, where we're going to talk a little bit more about Eddie and his profession and his view of therapy and how he set up and runs his practice and why his clients and patients love him so much, and why I love him so much. So we'll get into that next week, and I'm looking forward to it. But I think this is a really good way to pause. So on behalf of the entire listenership and viewership, Mr. Reece, I would like to express sincere gratitude for your willingness to give us a peek behind the curtain and kind of bare your chest in a way that is an example for what it means to be truly strong and courageous enough to get weak and get vulnerable. And that is, in my opinion, the true mark of courage and strength. So you're an inspiration to me, my man. And I just want to let you know how much I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Billy. Right back at you. I mean, I appreciate you creating the relationship that you've helped create here that, pretty trite to say makes me feel safe, but it's not really that. It's more than that. The experience of making these podcasts with you is, as you know, a realization of it's more than a dream that I had. It's a realization of being able to share with other people that I would never get to otherwise, and to maybe touch them in some way, give them something that they didn't have before they tuned in, and I truly believe that when we share some kindness, that there's a ripple effect that lasts until the end of the universe. And so I love that idea. And so my time with you is a way to have bigger ripples, I guess, than I have, and means the world to me. It really does. And I look forward to. Gosh, we got a long way to go in terms
Forever to go.
Yeah. So
forever to go.
So and thanks for the folks that tune in that we don't know yet. Oh my gosh, that you would take the time to listen, watch this means the world to both of us, and we hope it does help you in some way. And I'm so excited about our launch. It's right around the corner, and I look forward to really interacting with our listeners and uh, helping them kind of put things out there to make a world a little better place than when you know uh, than when we got here. We want to leave it a little better than it was. I mean, I'd do that all over the place. Our Mercy for You golfers, I fixed at least 40, 50 ball marks every round. you know, so I'm just I want to leave the world a better place than what I found. And so thanks, Billy, for giving me this opportunity. I'll see you next time.
It's our pleasure. All right, folks. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.